Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest is a stand-up comic who grew up in Massachusetts, where she found herself living in the foster care system by the time she reached her early teens. Still, she managed to get a full scholarship to a prestigious college before migrating to Los Angeles to chase a career in acting. She describes here her moment of reckoning as a spiritual bottom, where she tells the story of how she found a path to help in an awesomely unlikely way. Won't you please welcome Renee Santos. So let's just start. Renee Santos, right? I say that right?
You did. You can say Santos too. I'm very American.
Right.
But
right.
yes, technically in Portugal they say Santos.
Right. Is that where your family is from, or are you?
My father's from the Azores in Portugal. My mother is from Cuba.
Right. Oh wow, cool. And then where'd you grow up?
Massachusetts. I'm a masshole.
Wow. What town?
That's an incredibly loaded question, actually, because I grew up in the foster care system. So I lived in 8 different towns. I went to, I'm kind of like in a weird way, like a military kid. Like I moved to a lot of places.
Sure.
I lived in Cape Cod till I was like 13. And then, but I lived in a few towns, Sandwich, Plymouth, and then I went into the foster care system as a freshman in high school, and then I lived in 8 different homes. I went to 4 different high schools.
How old were you at that point?
14. I was a freshman in high school, so I spent high school kind of all over the place.
And
but
I mean, not to invade your privacy, but what prompted that?
There's a lot of struggles in like the home life, and
right.
my mother's not entirely well. I'm writing a screenplay about it, but
sure.
It's still in process. But yeah, it's hard. Speaking of anonymity, it's like I've experienced this a lot in my life, like as I've worked as a comic and started to get like a little bit of press and interviews. Like I do my best to like honor my mother's privacy, but also it's a part of my story, and so there's that juxtaposition of like I want to be able to share my experience but still respect the fact that she's sort of a private person. But yeah, my mother's just got a lot of mental illness, and they found it not appropriate for us.
When you were in foster care, were you able to stay in touch with your mother as well?
No, I didn't talk to her for almost a decade.
Wow.
And we're not really close today, too. It's not really... I have a mother on paper, but I don't really have a relationship with her. And I don't even say that from like a sad place. It's just not a...
No, that's just the reality. Yeah. You don't, that doesn't have to be, I mean...
That's why it's a weird question to answer, because people are like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it just happens to be my truth. When people are like I will run into people from high school and they're like, oh my God, remember me from high school? And I'm like, I went to 4 different high schools. I have no idea where you're from. I'm so sorry.
Right.
Like you just have a different story.
And where was your dad at this point?
He was around a little bit, but again, not a lot. Right. And I spent a little bit of time with him my freshman year, but like I didn't really know him, and so he had his own separate family, and so that was a good fit.
And how was the foster family process? I mean, that's so intense, especially at that age. Like,
I do a lot of advocacy work for this. So this is what I will say. It is horrible when you're a teenager. The reason why is everybody wants to adopt a little kid. I actually, my thesis at Emerson, I went to Emerson. And my thesis was called Too Young, Too Old. And it was about the process of the foster care system going in as a teenager. And when you're a teenager, you're constantly displaced, because as soon as they get a younger kid, you get bumped out of the home, because they're like,
oh my God, it's so fucked up.
Like no one wants a 14-year-old.
Everyone's a puppy.
I know. And then when I became 15, 16, 17, forget it. My senior year in high school, like every other week they wanted me out, like it just, like who wants a 17-year-old?
I barely want my own teenager. I have a 13-year-old, and sometimes the way she speaks to me, I'm like, oh my God, like I just have to walk away. And when you'd leave a place, would you go immediately to another place, or would you sometimes be in like a group home situation?
Well, they're all group homes. So it wasn't like I was adopted by any family.
Right.
Like every foster home I lived in would have had like 500 kids all in bunk beds. And it was not,
right.
the system in Massachusetts, now granted, this was like, I'll be 40 in June. So this was in the early, the 90s. I'm sure it's evolved slightly, but, it's a broken system. So yeah, I do a lot of advocacy work for.
And are you
about
as,
that?
Are you in touch with like people that you were in that system with at all? No. Wow. Yeah. So
it's very much a chapter in my life that I haven't really revisited too much. I mean, I've revisited in dialogue, but I don't really know. And a lot of the other thing about the system is they try to place you with people who you're related to first.
Right.
Understandably. So I lived with my aunt, I lived with my grandmother, but these were all people like I had met once in my lifetime. They weren't, so it was a very odd thing because I was meeting cousins for the first time who I'd never met. I lived with my grandparents that were only Portuguese speaking, and my dad never taught me the language, so I literally couldn't communicate with them.
Right.
So I got moved out of that house because like I didn't understand a single thing my grandmother was ever saying to me. She never spoke English to the day that she died, you know?
Wow.
So like I could understand a little bit of broken Portuguese, but not enough where I was in any strong communication with her.
And through this, I mean, like, in this period, is this when you start finding drugs and alcohol? Is that
totally? In fact, it saved my life, and I share about this a lot in the rooms. You know, that I was very much a goody goody two shoes, and initially, and I mean, I'd explored a little bit with like drinking my freshman year, but nothing too insane. And when I got into the foster care system, like they would torture me and throw stuff at me, and like. I mean, they did some pretty gnarly stuff. One of the girls like held me down and like burned me with cigarettes in the middle of the night unless I did drugs with them. And like, so finally I sort of like surrendered to that pressure and peer pressure saved my life because as soon as I started partying with them and I started doing a lot of cocaine, in high school, I was part of, and they stopped beating up on me and I became a part of the group. And all of a sudden I wasn't quite as focused on my academics and like, I became one of the cool kids, and then we would get new foster kids in, and then all of a sudden I was like part of it, and I, you know, like it was like I was
corrupting those kids. Yeah,
home.
sure.
Yeah.
And God, that's so interesting. I mean, it's funny. I went to boarding school, like fancy boarding school, and like the same sort of thing went on there, you know. And it was like I sometimes look back on it, and it was like such a sort of challenging situation for a kid to be sent away for the rest of your life, you know, at 14 or 15. And like, that was one of the ways I coped with it. I just like drank my face off and did drugs and like, that helped me belong, I guess. It's funny. But, you know, but you graduate, like you're able to maintain a real academic record, obviously. I mean, you end up at Emerson.
Yeah. So. You know, so I had this weird defiance, even in my active addiction, all the way through my active addiction. Even when it got bad, I was a very productive addict.
Right.
And I did a lot of uppers, you know, like I did triathlons and ran marathons. Like I ran the 2008 marathon on like tons of Oxycontin and cocaine in my electrolyte mix, running like a 7-minute mile. Like I was that kind of addict, you know, like I wasn't sitting around smoking weed and watching TV.
Right.
But yeah, so you know, I was writing screenplays and doing crazy stuff. But I remember when I was in the foster care system, we had this like group social worker meeting with our social worker, and I will never forget that they said only 3% of foster kids ever go to college or apply for financial aid to go to college. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to be one of these 3%. I'm going to learn how to do it, and I learned how to fill out a FAFSA and what federal financial aid forms were. And, you know, this became my defiance. Is like, I was going to be the foster kid that like broke the rules and went to college and got this amazing education. And, you know, I went to a conservatory that cost $120,000. My education was $32,000 a year, even in the late 90s.
Sure.
Wow. And I, you know, I went there on scholarship because I was a ward of the court. And, you know, that's part of our broken system. If you're dirt poor, you can go to college. And if you're filthy rich, you can go to college. But if you're anything in between, you cannot go to college.
It's so difficult.
but yeah, so like I thought, you know what? I kind of was handed a shitty card here. I might as well utilize it and go to
That's
a really good
amazing.
school.
That's so
So,
cool.
so yeah, that's how I ended up.
And how did you like Emerson?
I loved it. Although again, I had sort of a defiance. That seems to be a resonating word for my experience in most of my life, actually, now that I think about it. But I wanted to go to NYU or UCLA, and because I was a ward of Massachusetts, I was only granted scholarships to stay inside the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, interesting.
So when I got into Emerson, it was like my backup because I wanted to go to Tisch and I wanted to be in New York, and but I just didn't get any financial aid. That wasn't going to be a possibility for me to go to New York City unless I wanted to pay for it out of pocket, which like wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So I went to Emerson, and that first year, I was using a lot, and I actually got kicked out of the theater program, and I had to take summer classes to get back in. I don't say that a lot, but yeah, right. I got kicked out of the second semester. I was not actually in the theater program in my freshman year, but I made up for classes by taking intensive classes that summer to get myself back in. But, you know, my active addiction still didn't kick in too hard while I was in college. I was still controlling it, you know, I would go in and out, and I would have moments of not abstinence, but of control around it, where I was really managing it. And it hadn't sort of like taken over my world yet.
And it's also really college, so everyone's partying. So it's really hard to sort of evaluate your own using. Like, do I have a problem? I mean, I definitely use more than anyone else, but by the same token, I'm still like getting good grades and showing up at class and, you know, stuff like that.
Totally.
You know?
And I think part of the challenge for me as an addict is I wasn't a huge drinker. And so that was, in my naivete, the definition. You know, it's part of the reason why I struggled when I first, you know, came to the liquid fellowship, if you will, because I had a hard time. I had a hard time identifying with that because I was the girl that would like be the designated driver, even though I'd be high and I'd be on blow and I'd have tons of pills. Like I would be the girl that didn't drink for the whole night. So when I basically came out as an addict, people were like, but wait a minute, you were always our designated driver. Like, I don't understand. You never even really drank. So it was a hard thing. I mean, I would when I couldn't get my drugs. And so I was occasionally drunk, but it was always like, that was my last resort when I couldn't get access to anything else. So I basically needed to be loaded all the time, which is why, yes, I am an alcoholic. I'm an addict. I'm all of it. But that's why identifying as an addict for me resonates, because I am an addict.
Yeah,
put it in front of me, I can't stop. That whole 1 is too many, 1,000 is never enough. It does not matter what it is. So that the language made more sense for me to identify as an addict.
And so when you graduate from Emerson, what happens? Where do you,
I went to, that's really where my activation started. Sure. So I drove across country in 2002 by myself it's actually kind of a cool story. This is where I really got to know my dad, because I didn't talk to my dad in many, 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 many years.
Right.
And my dad is a Portuguese immigrant and wanted to get a passport to be able to travel, but he had served he became naturalized when he was like 20 and served in the U.S. Navy and got naturalized in San Diego. And so he couldn't get a passport because he didn't have his naturalization papers that had that raised symbol, and they wouldn't put it in the mail and they wouldn't fax it. He had to physically pick up his naturalization papers. So when I was driving across country, my dad coincidentally, like he called, I don't even remember the why, but it was just the universe aligning, because I hadn't talked to him in years and years and years. My roommate was supposed to go with me, who was epileptic, and he didn't get a medical waiver to drive because he could possibly seizure. Right. So it was literally the day before I was supposed to move to LA and drive across the country, and I was going to go by myself. And I was panicked. I'm like 21 years old. I'm like, I don't want to drive to LA by myself. I was in Boston, you know? Right. And so my dad's like, weirdly, I mean, it doesn't even make sense, but he happened to be on vacation that week, and he had called. Oh, that's what it was, is because he had heard from my sister Nina, who was in contact with him, that I was needing a car, and my uncle Mike sold cars. But at this point I already had a car. He just didn't know, but that's why he was reaching out. Right. He was doing his best to try to like reconnect with his kids. And so, you know, I told him, I'm like, I can't even talk to you right now, Dad. Like, I have no ride. I have nobody to drive across country and blah, blah, blah. And I'm bawling. He's like, wait. I happen to be on vacation for 2 weeks. I need to pick up my naturalization papers in San Diego, which is only 3 hours south. Why don't I go with you? I'll pick up my papers and then drop you off in LA and I'll fly back. And I was like, wait, what?
That's amazing.
So that is the story. And so my dad and I.
Are you writing that movie?
I should, right? That should be on a
Yes.
screenplay. Yeah, so I drove across the country with my dad when I was 22, who I barely knew, and like we really bonded. And he's like this crazy, like sort of nomadic spirit like me, and with like the big beard. And my dad, we made a steak on the engine of my car because he put a raw steak on my engine in Boston. We ate it in Raleigh, North Carolina because it was cooked on the engine. Like,
so amazing.
Crazy. He's like, no, trust me. Like we would stop and get gas and he would like season the shit and like roll up the tin foil. It was so weird. But like it was the best tasting steak I had ever eaten.
Sure. Engine block steak. Yum.
I was like, you should like write this down, like road traveling.
Totally.
Cooking. I don't know where he came up with that idea, but it worked. I mean, it probably gave us cancer. I have no idea if we're supposed to cook a steak on an engine of a car, but we did. So yeah, that's how I ended up in LA. So then I ended up in LA in 2002.
And where did you land in LA? Like, what was your first?
Santa Monica, actually. I was a live-in nanny. That was my job. So,
nice. And did you have that job lined up before you headed out?
No, I got it when I got here, but I had been a nanny in Boston, so like that was kind of what I did all the way through college. Because I didn't stay in the dorms all 4 years, and I ended up transitioning to being a live-in nanny in Boston. So I got a good referral to an agency out here. So I like proactively made phone calls, but I kind of filled that gap pretty quickly.
Yeah, cool.
When I got out here. But when I got to LA, I was also doing an external programs initially. So my first 3 months here, I was interning and they put me up at the Oakwood Apartments in Burbank, actually. But then once I graduated from that program and got my last like 8 credits, I then had to move out. And that's
right. Oh, nice.
And then I stayed in LA for 13 years.
Wow. And were you acting and stuff in LA?
I was, I mean, obviously it was a slow roll. I've only been union since 2009 and I got here, which has now been a decade, but, I was doing some non-union work and some small stuff and student films and what have you, like everybody.
Were you doing stand-up?
I didn't start doing stand-up until 2007. I kind of feel like stand-up chose me, but initially, but it was wonderful for me because I had done that hustle for like my first 7 years in LA, or whatever, first 5 years in LA. And I felt like I didn't have a voice, and it was like, it's like a musician who's allowed to pluck one guitar string and then like 6 months later can come back and pluck another guitar string. And I'm like, but I want to play a song.
Yeah.
And so stand up was the conduit to me being able to play a song. And, I liked that I was able to create my own voice and my own platform. And I had double majored at Emerson in acting and writing. So it's kind of like I discovered stand-up sort of inadvertently.
How did you end up doing stand-up?
I took this intensive like stand-up workshop with Leslie Wolf. And it culminated by like doing a 5-minute set.
Yeah, totally.
Which was also a very weird night because the day that I showcased that weird improv was a night that Sarah Silverman was headlining at the Improv. So like her name was on the billboard and stuff. So I walk in and I get it all the time that I look like Sarah Silverman. And like 3 people stop me like, oh my God, she's here. So my first time ever doing basically open mic stand up. People were like asking me for autographs and I'm like, this is so weird because I'm not her. But like, it was just a weird experience to be like doing stand up for the first time, but people thinking I was
you're already
the first
famous.
time I was doing it. And I'm like, all right. I actually signed this one guy's headshot just to get him to go away. And I'm like,
totally.
I just want you to know, like, this is fake. Like, this is, I'm not Sarah Silverman. So I'm going to sign Sarah Silverman, but like, I don't want to get sued later because this is not going to be her signature. I'm Renee Santos, but you don't believe me.
And then, at that point is what's your sort of drinking and using look like at that, like by the time you start stand up?
I mean, I'm sort of going backwards because that was it got bad early. When I first got to LA in 2002, I met my first girlfriend. I did a line of blow off her belly button at a club called Girl Bar. And I was like, hot.
I remember Girl
So,
Bar.
yeah, you do? But
On La Brea, right?
I think
No?
it's on the brand. No, no, Robertson, I think. I think it's on
Okay.
that stretch where like the Abbey and all of that is.
Right. Oh, okay.
The near.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's right.
So really that's where my active addiction started, was once
Right.
I started dating that girl. And actually, now that I think of it, my timeline for Santa Monica, I had lived in Long Beach with her first before I moved to Santa Monica. I was working in Santa Monica, but I didn't become his live-in until after our breakup. But yeah, I was really, really just active. But I hid it for long years. Like any good addict, no one knew I was using.
Yeah,
I was very productive for a long time. So she got it for free. Like she was dealing it on the side, and so I was using a lot. So even in the early pursuit of my career, I was high all the time. By the time I started doing stand up in 2007, like it was already pretty bad. Really bad, because I got clean in 2009.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So it was like I had been high. My active addiction really was 7 intense years, but it was intense years. Like from 2002 to 2009, I was high every second, every minute of the day. In 2006, I had like almost overdosed, and her parents had come to like intervene. I had passed out in a pool of blood and lost my entire septum, had fallen onto the floor, and like, but that wasn't my bottom. I kept using. And so
what happens when you lose your septum? Do you rebuild it?
No, I still can't breathe out of the left side of my nose. It collapsed, and it's still, not that I want to have anybody look at my nose right now, but you can still see my collapse.
Right. No, it's just one of those things I remember, like you'd hear about, like in college, and when I was doing, I probably did the most coke in college, and then, but I'd never met anyone who'd actually happened to. So. Hi.
It was bad. I mean, I still have breathing issues. Whenever I have just like a regular sinus infection, like normal people, it hurts so bad that I sway with pain, because I can stick my entire pinky through my nose, like on the inside of my nose. I still have it. And I haven't done blow in over 11 years.
Right.
I think it's healed a little bit over time, but I guess cartilage takes a very long time.
It's interesting that like in that period of intense using, you still like start a stand-up thing and like run a marathon. Like you really are.
I'm a very productive addict. I've written screenplays, which I think kept me sick for a long time, because I was
because it's harder to bottom out, because you keep scraping yourself up off the floor and like, here we go. Yeah, sure.
Here we go. And it's for when I got clean in 2009, it was really a spiritual bottom. I was about to turn 30. And it was just like, I had been so high for all of my 20s. I barely remembered them. And just everything was sort of a cloud. And I just thought, I don't want to, like, when I know that I'm still young, but like, when am I going to check into being a grown up? Like there was that line of like, okay, like this is not quite as cute anymore. And, now as I fast approach 40, I turn 40 in a couple of months. I'm like, it's really not cute now. When I see I'm thinking, God, if I didn't stop 10 years ago.
Yeah, right. How bad
although
would
in
it be
full
now?
transparency, relapse is a part of my story.
Right.
But I have
when you had this like spiritual bottom, like where were you? I mean, what was sort of the progression that got you to actually get help and get clean?
It's hard to define exactly what the moment was that was my spiritual bottom, but I do remember being in line into Trader Joe's, and I had texted myself in one of my old school flip phones with a thumb, as I was waiting in line, because I was really high and I think I had taken too much, that like my heart was racing, and I'm waiting in line in the checkout line, and the only thing I knew to like relieve my anxiety in that moment was I texted myself, I'm an addict, over and over and over and over again the entire time I was waiting in line. I read it back, and I kept, for the next 2 days, I kept reading it back. It was like 28 or like almost 30 times that I had just written, I am an addict, in succession, waiting in line. And it was like, seeing it on paper, I just couldn't deny that was my story. And I started to identify with some of the stuff that I had done, like toward the end of my active addiction, I had really betrayed my ex-girlfriend. Like my ex-girlfriend had pneumonia and a pretty bad case of it, and a massive bronchial infection. She was in a lot of pain, and she was given Tylenol. And this is when I had thrown out my pills because I wanted to stop. You know, like I had these moments toward the end of my active addiction where I was like, okay, you know what? I'm done. And I tossed all my pills down the toilet, and then I was panicked because I didn't have any pills.
Right.
And I had even gone to my drug dealer and I had said, like, if I call you, do not give me anything.
Right.
I kept doing these things, but then I dug myself my own hole because I'm like, I can't get access to the drugs because I just told on myself. But like, then I was panicked. So at any rate, my ex had gotten really, really sick, and she'd gotten Tylenol with codeine. And I was like, oh my God. And she had like 2 refills on it. And I went to 2 different pharmacies, got all of the refills on it, saying that she was too sick to leave, like made it sound like I needed the refills. And then I emptied out these bottles and filled them with Benadryl. She found out, like she could tell that obviously she wasn't getting better. And she was like, this is Benadryl. And like, I don't know, like that's how bad my active addiction was, that I thought that I could pull the wool over her eyes. And, you know, like, so here she was with this infection, like she was in pain, and I was stealing her medicine to get high.
Right.
And the fact that like I was trying to like cut and paste a way to get high, that was really the bottom for me.
Right.
I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is sick. And what was really interesting was about a year before, I feel like there's no real way to keep this anonymous here, but you can do with it as you choose. Because the distinction of the fellowship is what matters in this. But I remember years before, I had gone to pick up an 8-ball, and I had asked to use the bathroom before I left my drug dealer's house. And when I closed the toilet, there were 3 candles in the back of the toilet sitting on like a folded piece of paper. And when I shut the toilet, one of the candles fell off in it. And I saw that it was an NA meeting directory.
Right.
And I remember pulling that NA meeting directory but the reason why I pulled it, because I was very much still in my active addiction, I was like, NA?
Right.
I've never heard of NA. What is this?
Sure.
And that is why I grabbed that flyers, because I had only heard of AA. And so had I seen AA, I probably wouldn't have touched that.
Oh, that's amazing.
But because it was a fellowship that I didn't recognize, like I didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
So I took that meeting, I put the candle back, and I took that meeting directory and I put it in my pocket.
Wow.
And when I had gotten home, I put it in a Bible that I never read. Like I had a Bible just because I was raised Catholic, and I never really believed in any of the dogma. So I had it more as like
superstition. Yeah,
like a superstition thing. So I tucked this meeting directory in this Bible. This was like 2008, just because I was curious. And so when I had this spiritual bottom in 2009, I was like, oh, there's a meeting directory. I know where there's a meeting directory.
Oh
and I went to the Bible and I grabbed that meeting directory, and there was a noon meeting at Fairfax and Melrose, right below. It was like 2 blocks from my apartment.
That's amazing.
Like walking distance. And I went to that apartment. I went to that meeting at noon, and I sat in the back of the room, and I just heard the literature, and I cried like a baby.
Sure.
And that was, but I took 2 shots of tequila, and then I went gonna get at it. And so that was really like my moment of discovery. So obviously my first meeting, I was still loaded, but my original clean date was August 14th, 2009. And it's weird for me to share that because relapse is part of my story. I feel like I sort of have to there's no way I can't share that story now. But I was clean for 4 years, and on September 3rd of 2013, I took back my will. I was like cleaning a house for this like catering event. Like on the side, I would do these like catering events, and I had discovered I was leaving for one of my first cruises as a comic, as a paid comic. So I share this because it was very much a moment of success in my life. I was about to go to the Dominican Republic and open for Wanda Sykes on Olivia Cruises. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. But I knew that I was going to be performing 7 nights in a row on the ship, and I was really nervous. And so I'm cleaning this house, and I stumble upon Adderall, and I take the Adderall and I put it in my pocket. And I don't know why I did that. And I had that moment because I had 4 years clean, where I was like, you need to call your sponsor, say that you've taken this. And instead in that moment, my sister who was in the medical industry and basically believed that NA was a cult.
Right.
I decided to call her instead,
Right.
like any good addict. And,
Yeah.
and I was like, I just know I'm going to need to write on the cruise. And I'm just like nervous because in my active addiction, I used to take a lot of Adderall I would snort it
Right.
to help me write. And, but I was like, you know what? And this is how our disease will negotiate with us and fool us.
Totally.
And I think I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm not going to take the whole bottle. So I take one single pill, and I put it in my pocket, and I put the bottle back in the cabinet. And I'm like, I'm not going to take the whole thing.
Right.
And then I'm still contemplating, and I'm realizing, like, I'm negotiating. I'm like, but I'm only taking one, and I'm only doing it to write, and one's not going to get me high, and I'm not really relapsing. This is just a hiccup. Like, I'm good. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. And so that night when I wanted to write, to prepare for the 7 days, I took it. And as soon as I took it, before it even hit me, Nick, I swallowed it, and I thought to myself, holy shit, I just lost 4 years.
Right. Yeah.
Just lost 4 years because my intention was bad and I didn't do the right thing. And I had a toolbox. And I remember when I first got into the rooms, they said, NA will really fuck up your high. It's true. I couldn't do it. It didn't work.
Right.
So
wow.
As soon as it hit me, I just cried. And I had that moment where I'm like, I just lost my clean time, but I haven't lost my freedom yet.
Right.
Because I hadn't lost my life. I didn't go back there. I didn't have a bender.
Right.
I didn't keep using. Like, my relapse was one single pill.
And that was it. Yeah.
That was it.
Amazing.
Was it. But my recovery taught me that we get to decide how honest our program is.
Sure.
And that I was going to be a woman of integrity, and I wasn't going to be able to get up and share my story ever again if I was dishonest about this one pill.
Right.
And this wasn't about winning. This wasn't about getting an A+ in NA. This was about, like, my recovery and getting better. And I knew, like, that's what this program taught me, is that one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. And I took one.
Right.
And so I changed my clean date. And
Right.
my clean date now is September 4th, because I got high on the 3rd. So it's September 4th, 2013. So I have a little over 6.5 years.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So to go back to 2009, when you went to that meeting, and then presumably you stopped drinking after that as well, even though you're drinking in that, or you're drunk at that, whatever, you've had 2 drinks before that meeting. Does your life change quickly after that, or what's that?
It morphed. I was never the same after that meeting.
Wow,
I'm still not the same. Like, even with relapse being a part of my story, like, that was the beginning of my recovery. The seed was planted there,
Yeah,
and,
sure.
I never really went back to that life. Even though I lost my clean time, I didn't lose that recovery. So,
of course.
And I talk to my sponsor about this all the time. Like, August 14th, 2009 is still a huge milestone in, like, my life as a person, even though it's not my clean date anymore.
Yeah.
It's still a momentous day for me because I've never been the same since then. And the truth is, I've never really been high since then.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that one pill didn't really do much, but, yeah, I don't know. It's like a switch went off in me, and I never looked back. And there's been a lot of other areas of my life where I've needed to, like, dig myself a hole a bunch of different times, but because it could have been worse. I still had a job. I still had a home. I did not go to rehab. I detoxed in my shower in my apartment in fetal position. Like, I never.
What were you doing? What were you doing for work at that point?
I was a nanny, and I also was a barista at Starbucks. I was doing both. And, yeah, I just,
and then, out of curiosity, you moved to New York for 5 years as a sober person.
Yep.
Yeah.
I never used it.
And how was that?
It was amazing. Especially with all of this, like, COVID stuff happening, and weirdly enough, I was in a meeting the other day with somebody who was from Ireland that was in a New York City Zoom meeting, my old home group, which is sort of the blessing of all of this, is I'm able to go to my home group in New York, even though now I'm here in LA, and like that never would have happened. But at any rate, there was somebody from Ireland in the meeting, and they had always wanted to go to New York, and internationally, there's this like New York City is going to be shut down for years and not going to allow travel. We don't know if any of this is true, but it gave me some perspective in that moment, because I thought to myself, I got to live in one of the most magical cities in the world for 5 years. Like I didn't just visit New York. I didn't just have an experience in New York. I was in it, and also living in LA for 13 years, like as a performer, I've lived in two of the most amazing entertainment meccas in the world. And the industries are very different in both of these markets. And I feel so blessed to have had the experience of living in New York for 5 years. It changed me. It takes a lot of courage to live in that city. It's a hard city to live in. It's so expensive. I was working round the clock, but also live performance is really supported. It's supported in a different way than it is in LA. And I find that there's the competition is vibrationally, the competition is more intense. I don't think in LA, there's more of a nurturing, collaborative, like what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine, namaste, which I love, which is part of the reason why I'm back. But there was more that cutthroat, like there's not enough oxygen for all of us kind of energy in live performance in New York. But there was also something about that kept a fire under my ass that I loved. But then there's something so vibrant and loud about New York that I also really celebrate. Like you go to a stand-up comedy show in New York, and like the audience, there's just something about the audience would be like, oh no, she did it. Shit, that girl just said it. No. People would get up and be like, no, she did it. And in New York and in LA, everybody's like, oh my God, that was funny.
That never happened.
Oh my God. And everybody's so quiet. And they're like, that was really funny. And like the comics don't hear the celebration as much. Like New Yorkers are loud and they're vibrant and they're boisterous and they're smart. And not that people in LA aren't as smart, but there's something about that. And just the culture in New York. Like LA is, it's got a diversity, but it's so spread out. It's a different experience. There's such a different experience to get on a subway car. And this happened to me once where I was running to catch a train, and it was like a really amazing moment where I'm like, I am so grateful to be a New Yorker right now. But this Orthodox Jewish man had opened up the subway door because I was like running for the subway car, right? And so I run, and he holds the door open for me, and I'm like, thank you, sir. And I get in the train, and there's these group of like beatboxers, young like African American kids, like beatboxing in the corner, and then there's a Muslim woman and her little kid sitting in the car, and then I sit down as a lesbian comic, and I sit and the Orthodox Jewish man sits down with his wife who's in the skirt and the whole traditional garb, and we're all on the same subway car. And I had that moment where I thought, if more people had sat on this subway car, there would be no hate in the world.
Yeah, that's amazing.
None.
That's amazing.
It was like every kind of human being was in the exact same space, and we all were just trying to get to our next thing.
That's
and
so
I thought,
cool.
If you're not in New York, you don't experience this.
That's really wild.
And it was a magical moment for me. And I'm like, this city is special. This city is really special, And if I say it to anybody, like I do believe I was destined for the West Coast. There's a reason why I'm back here, but New York City was an incredibly important chapter of my life, of my adult life. I don't regret it. I know I was supposed to be there. And I think any performing artist, if they can, should live in New York for a portion of their craft.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, I got 2 more questions for you.
All right. Hit me.
First, your sister. I didn't realize, what was that like having a sister? Was she with you through the foster system, or were you guys?
Also loaded question. I'm one of 6, so I have 4 sisters and 1 brother.
Oh, wow.
So I was referring to my sister who was a nurse, but I have a sister who's a lawyer, a sister who's a nurse, I have a sister who lives in
You guys are all so accomplished.
Oh, well, no.
That's
Some
so
of us
cool.
fall through the cracks.
But I mean,
we're doing the best.
Did you guys all find yourselves in some form of foster care, or did some?
Not all of us. So that's also a part of my story. So my oldest sister was already above the age of 18 when we got removed. So she was never a part of the system. My second eldest sister had a very, very good friend in the neighborhood, which is one of the reasons why we didn't talk for a long time, that took legal guardianship of her when we were removed from my mom's house. And then my younger siblings had the same mother, which was the issue, but a different father. So they went to live with the father.
Oh, wow.
And so I, out of all of my siblings, was the only one that ended up in the foster care system.
Oh my God, you got fucked.
I got fucked. It's part of my story.
Have you remained close to your siblings? I mean, that many kids, it's hard to remain close to everybody, but
we weren't for a little while. There was a stretch there where, I was struggling through that resentment of like, why was I displaced and yada, yada, yada. But when we got a little older, we became a tribe. In my senior year in high school, my sister Terry, who was only 21 at the time, and I was 17, one of the foster homes got really, really bad for me. And she took legal guardianship of me. I had like 4 or 5 months till I was 18. I was just about to be an adult, but I couldn't handle it. Like, it was getting so bad. Like, I'd run away. I jumped off the roof of this house and hurt my leg because I was trying to escape, and I was in the top bedroom, and I was a train wreck of a human being then. But I called my sister and I'm like, Terry, you got to help me. And so she became my guardian. And then that year, she got pregnant with my niece, who is now 25 years old.
Oh my God.
And
wow.
So me and my other sister Nina moved in with her, and we helped raise my niece sort of as a tribe, and that's kind of how we became really close. Right. So I don't have any kids of my own, but like I have this 25-year-old niece, and like I woke up with her in the morning. You're
basically the mom, yeah, or one of the moms.
And even when she just recently graduated and got her master's from GW, and it's like, she brings us up all on stage and is like, these are my other moms, but they're my aunts, but they're not, because we were like a tribe. It was different than.
What's her master's in?
Speech pathology.
Oh wow, how cool.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's sort of amazing because her little sister is 4. So my sister, years later, she married, and so I have a 25-year-old niece and a 4-year-old niece, and they're like 2 generations, but they're sisters.
That's so cool. And now the other question is a promotional question. You have a stand-up special, yeah? Is that?
Yeah, I do. My special is it's a good time to watch it, guys, while we're all in quarantine.
Right.
My special is streaming on Roku and also on Amazon Prime. It's called Outside the Box.
Awesome.
It's also available audio files too on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, anywhere you can download music. So there's both the album's called the same thing, Outside the Box, whether you get the album or you see the 1-hour special on Amazon Prime. But you can find the links to all of it on my website, which is just myname.com. So it's just www.reneesantos.com. Has links to all my social media. It's kind of a one-stop shop if you want to find.
Well, Renee, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking time to sit down in this Zoom COVID crazy world to tell your story.
Zoom COVID world, right? I know.
Good.
It's so long.
Hey, so if you've been enjoying this podcast, you can head over to my Patreon page and feel completely free to support the show with a modest contribution at www.patreon.com/The Drunkalogs. The Drunkalogs cover art is designed and created by John DeManil, and the Drunkalogs theme song is composed and performed by Stephen Stout. I am Nick Morton.